I'm Vance Bastian here with my co-host S.A. Baz Collins for this week's Written on the Edge Season 10, Episode 2 interview. We'll be talking with Zachary Pace and discussing their book, I Sing to the Waiting. So let's get to know our guest. Zachary Pace is a writer and editor who lives in New York City, whose first book is I Sing to Use the Waiting, a collection of essays about the women singers who've made me who I am, and their writing has been published in The Baffler, Bomb, Bookforum, Boston Review, Frieze Magazine, Interview Magazine, Literary Hub, the Los Angeles Review of Books, the Penn Poetry Series, the Yale Review, and elsewhere. Zachary, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Honored to be here.
Our pleasure. So, where did this passion come to start writing? Because putting words to a page is work.
Well, it actually comes down to a singer. I remember very vividly, 8 years old, watching the movie Poetic Justice, starring Janet Jackson.
Uh-huh.
I was too young for the film, but I saw a lot of films when I was too young, and that was one of them. And in the film, Janet Jackson plays an aspiring poet, someone who writes uh, in their head as they're going through difficulties. And what I didn't know at the time was that Janet Jackson was reciting poems that were actually written by Maya Angelou in the film.
Mhm.
But in any case, when I was 8 years old and I heard particularly the poem, it's called Alone by Maya Angelou, recited by Janet Jackson as though she were writing the poem in the
Hmm.
film. And that's when I thought, I want to try that. And I tried exactly that. In fact, I remember the first poem was very much a homage to that poem Alone. And by homage, I mean a rewriting. I used the same cadence, some of the same phrasing, but that was the first time that I wanted to make a piece of writing that sounded something like that. And I don't think ever stopped after that moment. I remember being very young and feeling like, what's next? What do I write about next, and how?
Do you still have that original writing? The one you
I'm
did?
sure I do. I'm sure it's somewhere. I can remember. I have some lines in my memory still there. It's a little embarrassing, but they're still rattling around in there. And I'm sure I could find somewhere the actual thing.
Awesome. So let's move on to your book. If I were to see you at like a book fair with your book on the table and I were to walk up and say, "What is I Sing to Use the Waiting all about?" What would you tell me?
Yeah, well, yes, I've had many people ask pretty much that question, and I always say it's 14 essays, and each one is about a different female singer who I've loved throughout my life. And it tells mainly, each essay tells the story of a turning point moment in their life and career. And more often than not, it looks at a time in my life when they meant the most to me, and what they meant to me at the time.
Is this also sort of memoir adjacent or
Yes, it's a mix. Some are purely journalistic, and some mix memoir and journalism of sorts, and then some are purely memoiristic. And
nice?
it's there's no formula. It just some of them came out much more centered on the singer, and some of them came out a little bit more centered on my story.
Nice. So did Janet make the cut?
So I do tell that story in the very first essay because it's one of my origin stories, and I tell the story of that film inspiring me to want to write poems at an early age. And I didn't start writing prose until I started writing this book. I had written and published and tried to pursue a life of writing poems, and what just wasn't able to really communicate uh, anything that felt original or completely necessary until I started to, not to say that these are completely necessary, but if I may say
Hmm.
so, it's a little, it feels a little bit more timely, relevant, important than my, erotic life, which was all I could make into poems for whatever reason.
Awesome. So I know that most of the essays center on a turning point in the woman's career. Is
Mhm.
there one you can highlight and show how it relates, just to give readers an idea of how the stories unfold?
Absolutely. I think the first one that comes to mind would be the essay centered on Cher, because it looks primarily at two films that she starred in around the same time. The first one was a movie called Mask, and the
Hmm.
second was a movie called Mermaids. And in the film, she plays the same character, she more or less. The first film, Mask, is actually based on a true story. The second one is the character was actually somewhat based on Cher's own mother. But in both films, she plays a mother who is a little bit more concerned with her romance and um, her life of pleasure than she is with her children's feelings of, safety and care. And she plays a very caring mother, but one who sort of makes her children follow her whims, and most of her whims are around romance. And what was interesting to me, not only was the way that the characters were similar and resembled Cher's relationship with her own mother, but the fact of those films being um, made at a time when Cher was struggling in the music industry. She had a long history with Sunny and Cher, and then she had a few major break, solo records, and then she had a few that were progressively less and less commercially successful, and her career was really in trouble. And then she started acting, and her career picked up. And then after those films were made, she, released Heart of Stone, which was it has I can turn back time if I could turn back time on it, which
Right.
is, she could probably live off of those royalties alone. Not to assume anything about how much of that stake she has, but that's just to say it was wildly popular, and it turned her life and career around. But she had to be very inventive and try something new and risky. And she made these films that I loved as a kid. Again, they were a little uh, more mature than I was probably. It was probably appropriate for me, but I loved these films, and I emulated her in so many ways, and also recognized um, that my mother was not one of those mothers. She prioritized being attentive to me over a lot of, over having romance, over pursuing a lot of her own interests and pleasures. She sacrificed a lot to make me feel supportive and supported, and to have opportunities. So those films at a young age helped me recognize and appreciate what my mother had sacrificed for me.
Very cool. Have you been getting feedback from readers that your stories have touched them too?
Yes, and lots of people are have connected with the idea of using music to self-soothe. I mean, that's been the main thing. And the first essay in the book, the introductory essay, focuses on the sound of a queer voice, and what makes a voice sound what we think of as queer or gay for gay men, a gay voice. And many people who I've spoken to have connected with the ambivalence around that, around having a voice that marks you in public, but also just the fact that by the time we're aware of what our voice sounds like, it takes a lot to change it.
Hmm.
And the impulse to change that could be considered maybe a little bit of like self-homophobia. So people have connected with that ambivalence around having a voice that sounds queer. And the great discovery in writing that essay for me was that one of the greatest influences on the way a voice sounds is the speech models that a child has and my speech models were women. I was completely awed by women performers from the very beginning. I mean, I tell the story in this essay of my mother's memory of my being a toddler, crawling to the television to dance to the beat of Gloria Estefan's Pepsi commercial where she sings conga.
Yeah.
And so before I could even walk, I was crawling to the TV to dance along with these women who just made me feel joy and made me happy to be alive.
Awesome. Bez, did you have questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. Okay,
Yeah.
first of all, can you share with us the list of who you have in the book?
I think I can do this by memory. Yeah. Well, the first piece is sort of an overture, queer voice, establishing my origin stories, such as Janet Jackson and Gloria Estefan, and it's sort of a mixtape in itself of various people who were there from the very beginning. And then the next piece is centered on Madonna, her Ray of Light era, especially, and then Kim Gordon, and that's sort of focused on the last song in the last Sonic Youth record, and then what Kim Gordon did on her own after Sonic Youth disbanded. Then we've got Cat Power, uh, whose real name is Shawn Marshall. She performs as Cat Power, and then we have got an essay about stuck song syndrome, a little bit of an interlude, I guess, pulling back from one singer and looking at what happens when songs get stuck in your head and what we know about that and what we still don't know scientifically. And that tells the story of some of the songs that have been stuck in my head over time. Um, and then I'm gonna lose the order, but after that we've got Whitney Houston, uh, Cher, Rihanna. There's an essay about the vocabulary, or listing the vocabulary words that I remember learning from Mariah Carey songs, Fiona Apple songs, and Joanna Newsom songs. Those three are in one essay. There's an essay about a band called Hopalong, and the lead singer named Frances Quinlan, and how Frances coming out as non-binary coincided with mine, and my own discovery of my preference for gender fluidity. And I'm sure I'm forgetting there's a very short piece about Nina Simone, and then there's a final piece centered on the theme song from Pocahontas, looking at the story of the real life Pocahontas, and then the vocalist of Pocahontas' singing voice, who was actually a white vocalist, and looking at the difficult sort of legacy there. And then the afterword, or the last piece, looks at six different women who hadn't made it into the book yet, but who had played a major part. And that looks at a B-side from their catalog. The B-side being the flip,
Yeah,
the side,
for all the kids out there who don't know.
yeah, yeah. Well, because we don't have B-sides anymore. The single, the hit single was on the A side, and the B side was sort of a
Sometimes
miscellaneous
a throwaway
track.
song.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. Now they would probably be bonus tracks. Like
Yeah.
if you buy the deluxe edition of an album, those songs resemble B-sides. And those six were Jewel, Joni Mitchell, Ani DeFranco, Tori Amos, PJ Harvey, and Patti Smith. I think I've got everybody now.
That's quite a collection.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why I'm asking is because, especially with queer men in general, and again, this is a big, broad stroke here. So if this doesn't fall for you, I'm not excluding you in the conversation. I'm just trying to make a point here. Um, but gay men of different generations have their divas, so from my era, first on my list would be Barbara Streisand, so there are definite uh generational women,
Hmm.
Dionne Warwick, for me it's a lot of those 60s, 70s, 80s Olivia Newton-John, Pat Benatar, so Ann Wilson, and I think what's interesting is that for a lot of gay boys, and I always put gay and boy together because I think we're a different kind of boy.
Hmm.
So I always say it as one word. But I think for gay boys, um, there because we don't get the benefit of our relationship building skills in high school, like our, straight counterparts. Um, we often take these songs from these women who sing about love and about the men in their life or the boys in their life or whatever, and we often feel through them and channel that connection of, this is what I would like, this is what I'm searching for, I identify with what she's singing. And I think that it's probably one of the few ways, and it can be for male singers too, but I think it's one of the few ways where we can survive that tumultuous period because we take in the music and it allows us to express our feelings in it that we're not able to express in the real world. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that resonates with me in that when I was, well, in a very specific anecdote, when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, interested in writing poems, knowing already that I was attracted to men, to a male pronoun, and I couldn't, write to about him, or and I couldn't write to the he, him, his. Maybe if I didn't, for whatever reason, think that I could write to a you, or maybe I was writing to a you and felt as though I needed some more freedom. So I remember Trisha Yearwood, a country singer. I grew up in a rural town where country music was very, very popular, and Trisha Yearwood is a country singer, and she sang a song called She's in Love with the Boy and told a story about two characters. She was the narrator, but she was channeling or projecting what she knew about love or wanted to know more about love through two characters. I remember as a kid thinking, oh, okay, I can do that. Two, I can tell stories about, a couple in the world, male, female couple, and I can talk about him through having her also in the room, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Um, so I was a way to triangulate talking about desire and to be able to address him without it being through my first person.
And I think it's interesting because, some of the choices you have in your book, I find very, very queer in a way that for me, I have someone on my list who I absolutely love, but most gay men of my age would know who she was, but they wouldn't understand why I chose her. So like Joe Stafford is one of my favorite vocalists from that old era, the golden age
Hmm.
of Hollywood. And the reason why she qualifies for me is not because of her legit career, but she and her husband was a musician. She and her husband used to create comedy albums of being the worst pianist and the worst singer on on the planet, and they went by the name Jonathan and Darlene Edwards. And this was so queer to me that they would create these party records that she would just try to be the worst. And I don't necessarily mean totally off key, but she would just try to be like timing wise, and he would plunk out the notes if she was going off the melody line, which I thought was really funny. And so at parties where I had friends over, I would put regular music on, as kind of background music. And amongst the CDs, yes, children, we were doing CDs back then. Um, Amongst the CDs, I would have it Jonathan and Darlene Edwards. And the reaction in the room when one of their songs came on was just hysterical, but it was a very queer thing for me to do, to just slip that in and just see how the gays in the room would react to what was
Right,
going on, and the
right.
hooting and the holler, so I think it's something that, coming back to your list and I think it's something that we sometimes choose these women for reasons that are not necessarily apparent on its face value, but they have some little intrinsic thing that kind of we can identify and resonate with us. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I just went back to some writing that I remembered from when I was a teenager. Uh, a writer called Michael Thomas Ford used to publish these books of humorous essays, a little bit like David Sedaris, but was
Mm-hmm.
never reached that level. Um, and he had a book, and pardon my language, it was called That's Mr. Faggot to You. And somehow in the early 90s, I found this book in rural upstate New York. And one of the essays is about his love for the country singer Wynonna Judd. And he very simply identifies a quality uh, called the I could be that too quality. And he believes that that's what gay men, queer men are attracted to in these divas. Is there something about I could do that too. Now, I've never understood how Wynonna Judd could be one of those people because she seems highly produced. But Joni Mitchell or Jewel was an easy one for me because it was guitar and not necessarily very well, in Jewel's case, not phenomenal guitar playing, not but something if only I could carry a tune and if only I could learn this guitar in my lap, I could do that too. And I could have love and attention from the whole world, that I didn't get from my homophobic father or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask about the title?
Yes, it's a line, the first line from a poem by Emily Dickinson.
Okay.
And I can't remember how I came across the poem. I've loved Emily Dickinson for a long time. It's the kind of thing that I would usually remember, and it sort of bothers me that I have no idea when I first came across it. But it's a beautiful poem, and it it describes the way that we sing to ourselves or use music in order to self-soothe and to keep the dark away is how she puts it. And I've always understood that to be, sadness, depression, despair, uh, and in Emily's case, death, but
Hmm.
to keep the dark away, singing to self-soothe and to use the waiting, to make use of time that you're otherwise
Hmm.
um, waiting. And so, for example, I just took a 2.5 hour train ride and I listened to someone the entire time. Yeah, and I was as research, as studying it to find the story.
Nice.
Mm.
Is there
And,
any?
well, I
Go.
just want to add to that. It's just really interesting too that when you um how do I put this? Uh, well, you know what? Never mind. I'm gonna pull that back because I think it's something that would take us down a real weird wandering path. So I'm gonna let that go. Um,
Okay.
Vance, go ahead and finish your thought.
All I was going to ask was there anything else about your book that we didn't think to ask, but you want people to know?
No, I mean, I think that what else can I say? No, I don't think so. I feel as though it's very well represented and hopefully intriguing to folks.
Hmm.
Are you
And
thinking of
relatable.
doing it? Oh, here's a question, just a
Yeah,
real
yeah,
quick
yes,
question.
yeah, yeah.
When you talked about that book and finding, the kind of essay about it, did that become like the seed for you writing this book?
It probably was, but I hadn't thought about it until after the fact. I hadn't,
Then you made the connection.
yeah. And then I thought,
Ah,
oh, well,
interesting. Okay.
I encountered this in 1994 or 1993, and here I've built a whole project around this one thing that stuck in my mind and resonated with me back then. And now what I'm trying to do next, I'd like to incorporate my returning to that essay after the fact and realizing that it had planted the seed, you know, 30 years ago.
Okay. Excellent.
Awesome. Are you ready for our get to know you questions?
Yeah, I'm excited about these. These are really fun.
Take it away.
Okay. So, in this year of what I'm calling Wandering in the Weeds, can you name a movie that was better than the book?
So I this goes back to my teenage years again. I haven't actually read a whole lot of books that became movies since then, but I do remember loving the film, and I still love the film, Practical Magic.
Mm,
And I
Mm,
remember when it came out, trying to read the book by Alice Hoffman, and it just did not tell the same story, and it back then I when I loved a film so much I wanted to read the book and I wanted it to be the same, just basically the same thing as the film so that I could just watch the film basically through my reading. And I remember this book just did not grab me the same way that the film did. But
yeah,
this was
yeah.
such a
I
long
feel
time
that way about
ago.
Witches of Eastwick. That's another one. Yeah.
Yes,
Because the
yes,
book for John
yes.
Updike wrote, it was very almost condescending to the reader. It was
hmm.
really weird. And I'm like, no, the movie was better.
Exactly, exactly. I remember I forgot that that had been a book and that I tried reading that as well back
Yeah,
probably during the same time.
yeah.
And was just like, no, I want this to be the script the screenplay basically. And
Right, right. You
it's
just wanted
not.
a
It's
deeper dive into what the
yeah,
screenplay was giving you.
yeah.
Right, exactly.
Which
Okay.
interestingly, I must say they used to do that. They used to make these mass
Faithful
market
adaptation.
paperbacks
Yeah.
Yeah.
of films. And I remember the film Stepmom with Susan Sarandon and Julia Roberts.
Hmm.
They did one of those, and it was exactly what we're talking about here. I remember the narrator is talking about making a peanut butter sandwich on sunflower seed bread, and which was not in the film, but this added detail in
Right,
the
right.
film to book. And I was like, yes, this is the kind of detail that I didn't get from the film, but that, it took
Fleshes
me,
it out more.
yeah, and that's what I wanted, and that's what it gave me.
All right. Well, what's the most fascinating fact you know?
Oh, this is a hard one. But the first thing that came to mind was that I love I love the quote that you may know, something along the lines of I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend your right to say it, or I'll fight to my death for your right to say it. And I wanted to locate the source of that quote, and it's mainly attributed to Voltaire, but it turns out that he didn't write that.
Hmm.
A biographer, a female biographer of actually, used that quote to describe Voltaire's worldview. And it wasn't anything that he ever said, but it was the biographer's way of describing his attitude about something. And that description became misattributed to Voltaire. And
Interesting.
so the idea that I may not agree with you, but I'll fight for your right to say it comes from Voltaire's biographer of all people.
Excellent. All right. Well, what was your favorite subject in school?
English, obviously. I was the very stereotypical English teacher's pet, and all of my English teachers were my guardian angels and my fairy godparents.
Okay, excellent. Well, before making a telephone call, do you ever rehearse what you're going to say?
I rehearse everything. I rehearsed a lot of my answers to these
Life is a
questions.
production.
Phone calls, therapy sessions, you name it, I rehearse it beforehand.
Okay, excellent. Well, what current event or causes are you passionate about?
That's also a hard one because I can't think of a single one that doesn't feel connected to another one. I'm obviously very attuned to what's happening in Palestine, and I'm a Jewish person who comes from a Zionist family, and I am, one of the, the few family members breaking the cycle there, and it's been on my mind pretty constantly for the past year or more. So.
Okay. If you could visit anywhere in the world, where would that be? So he says from Madrid.
I know. Well, it's winter here, as it probably is where you guys are, and so I would love to go somewhere warm, right? I mean, I just got to Madrid. I have not spent more than 5 minutes outside, so I'm happy to be here. But I'd love to go somewhere warm, like Zipolita or something like that, a gay beach somewhere where it's 80 degrees, 85 degrees.
Because why not? All right.
Yes.
Well, who, if anyone, was your first celebrity crush?
That was hands down, it was Devon Sawa who I first saw him, I think, in a film called Little Giants back in 1993, and he was more famous for being in the film Now and Then, which has such a great cast, like Melanie Griffith and Christina Ricci and Demi Moore, actually, who's having such a renaissance right now. But Devon Sawa, he was the heartthrob in both of those films, and his image was in teen bop posters around my bedroom for years and years and years. He's still good looking. I just looked him up. He looks great.
All right. Well, finally, what's your personal favorite recipe that you make, and would you be willing to share it?
That's also a tough one. But the first that
Is all
comes to,
avocado on toast.
yeah, right, peanut butter and cheddar cheese. Um, which is a great combination, I have to say. I've loved it since I was a kid. But peanut butter cookies, there's a recipe from Paula Deen, who I know is also a problematic character, but
Yeah, she is a
it's a
character.
I
We'll
used to
underscore that.
love her show, and I know she said some awful, awful things, and I don't condone that at all, but I have made this recipe so many times. It's a peanut butter cookie, and it's just peanut butter, sugar, eggs, and vanilla in very square amounts, and it makes a really excellent cookie with no, I'm not gluten-free or anything, but it is gluten-free, extremely rich and satisfying and easy to make, and I've whipped them up hundreds of times.
Excellent. Yeah, I had here I had a version of something like that. There was a bakery in San Francisco called Specialties, and they made a cookie that was just this wedge of a cookie, peanut butter cookie. Because I what I detest about peanut butter cookies is when they're really sugar cookies with a wisp of peanut butter.
Yeah, oh,
No. They must be peanut butter front and center. That has to be the star. But these cookies were like that, and then they had huge chunks of chocolate chips from Rough Cuts, you know? So
Yeah.
you just got this really big mouthful of what it was almost like the best Reese's you'd ever had, you know?
Yes, exactly, exactly. This is that, totally that. It's like a cup of peanut butter, a cup of sugar, 1 or 2 eggs, and like a teaspoon of vanilla. And so peanut butter is the main thing.
Is the star.
So much sugar, but worth it.
Yeah. Sometimes, you know, just
If you can do it. In fact, the funny thing is this recipe called for Splenda of all things, but I always used just granulated sugar.
it'd be interesting to make it with Splenda. I think it
It
might
would be.
Yeah.
It would be.
All right, well, that's the list. You made it through. Bravo.
Really is. What a
Bravo.
blast. Thank you. Thank you.
So what's up next for you?
So I'm working on something that I've said too much about to too many people, and it just out of fear that it's not going to actually work out. But if it does, it'll be a book-length project around one singer.
Wow.
Sort of the same thing I've done with the essays, except a book length focused on one person in particular.
Nice. Well,
Somebody that I think everybody will like.
where should people go to get updates on that project, especially when you're ready for the big reveal?
Oh my goodness, probably Instagram. That's my way of telling people what's up these days. That's the only social media platform I use, and that is where I tend to let people know about things. It's my name, Zachary Pace, on Instagram.
Awesome. Do you have any final words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom. Try to act without a center. The center is the past. If you act from the center, you're always sort of tied to the past. But if the center is everywhere, like the forest, you're not just a tree, but you're the entire forest. I think that's how I'm trying to live nowadays.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. It's from Jiva Mukti, the idea. Not Jiva Mukti, excuse me, sidebar. Krishnamurti. He's an Indian writer and thinker, and it's a beautiful idea that comes from Krishnamurti.
Love it. All right, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Zachary Pace for being with us today. Zachary, thank you so much. And thank you for making time during your travels to do
I
this.
know.
Thank you. Pleasure's all mine, really. Thank you. Thank
Oh,
you.
our pleasure too. All right, we at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. So if you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. Please follow us on YouTube. Go on over there. We're expanding the channel. In addition to reviews on film and television, as well as books, in addition to author interviews, we're going to start adding queer history from both the US and a Mexico perspective. So stay tuned for those updates. The show was produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.rotepodcast.com. Tune in next week for your queer media fix.
Bye-bye.
Oh, what's that? Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.